Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Rexxfield Investigates podcast, where we do what we say, we investigate. Today, I am here with Dave Pilot, a colleague on the Intelligence for Good side. He's also with a financial institution, and today we're going to be talking about the current status of what cyber scams are, where the industry stands, and different improvements that can be done. So, Dave, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you
Yep.
having me.
Yep.
Big fan of what you guys are doing and excited to be here.
Thank you, thank you. So you want to go ahead and give a little bit of background on your experience, where and what got you here?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, I am at a financial institution. I'm not here to represent them or speak on their behalf, so I'm kind of keeping their name out of it. But I'm part of a fraud organization at a big bank, and I lead a team that is focused on disrupting financial crimes. The easiest way to think about it is traditional fraud operations teams sort of have an inside out view of fraud and scams. They're looking at the transaction life cycle, checking the risk signals, making decisions about money movement. My team, much like many of our counterparts across the industry, really looks at it from an outside in perspective. We're trying to understand what is the threat landscape, who are the actors, what are their motivations, and where can roadblocks be set up between them and my counterparts in our fraud shop, our commercial clients, grandma, right? Somebody has to get between the bad guys and the innocent and victims who don't understand the threats surrounding them every day and then do something about it. That's where my focus is. I've been in the role for several years, got a fantastic team with fantastic partnerships across not only the banking industry, but shops like yours. You mentioned Intelligence for Good, others. You know, it's an interesting space.
It absolutely is. A lot of the organizations like Unit 221B, Flashpoint, other threat intelligence providers who are doing a lot of really great work combating the ecosystem. And that's one thing a lot of people don't realize is there's a lot of folks behind the scenes who's doing that. And with a lot of those conversations, they happen at different security conferences and everything. So can you go ahead and tell me a little bit about the conference you just went to and kind of some of the topics that were covered there and just some of the discussions that happened there to understand the ecosystem for everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. So the latest conference I was at was the NCFTA Disruption Conference in Pittsburgh. Um, Hopefully, audience here is familiar with NCFTA, but if not, I would recommend everybody go look them up. It is a fantastic organization, essentially a fusion center across primarily financial industries, but other business verticals as well, which is important because fraud and scam funds don't stay in banks. There's an automotive component, there's a travel component, retail, obviously. So, the Targets and Walmarts of the world. So, that industry consortium once a year pulls attendance this year was over 1,000 of and it's the people who are in the fight. 1,000 of my closest friends who understand the true threat landscape. The sessions as part of the conference every year are fantastic. The content is solid. We're not talking about how things were working 3 years ago. We're talking about how they're gonna work 5 years from now, and what do we have to do to be partially ready, which is a challenge, depending on which company one works at. It's a very forward thinking conference. It incorporates a material amount of federal law enforcement, which is fantastic. Those relationships continue to grow. It also includes international law enforcement. The tentacles are long, and that's critical. Again, in this threat landscape. So it's a fantastic conference. The content ranged from fraud and scams to AI and mythos, as you would expect. But it also gets into elements of physical security, corporate security, executive protection that a lot of people don't think about. It's not obvious that the common threads linking the actors behind those activities also tie to things like the Brian Thompson assassination,
Mhm.
right? You can draw a line from the actors going after Granny to what happened on that New York street. Part of the value of the NCFTA conference then for me is that when you're in a location with people who do understand all of those connect points, and you've got subject matter experts for different pieces of it, but we've all learned to speak a common language, which allows us to at least think more in 3D than 2D as a result of those interactions. And those interactions happen, every day throughout the year, but that focused week is always powerful. Always exhausting.
Having been at Disruption too, yeah, I really like the NCFTA. I like what they do as an organization, and they very much do that forward thinking concepts of trying to be like, okay, so here's where scam is now. How can we move the entire organization where we can get to a place where we're actually making an impact? I know I presented there when I started working with a lot of the federal law enforcement and institutions I started working with was a lot of the agents through that organization too. They do a lot of great work trying to pull in the right partners and everything, and I will say no organization is perfect, but the idea of what they're trying to do, absolutely love it. Because you can look back at that conference and realize, okay, because this conference happened here, you made this connection. And because you made this connection, you were able to stop that type of crime over here.
Yes.
And you mentioned things like your Targets and Walmarts. You mentioned the automotive side, and like that's one of the biggest thing people don't realize when it comes to scams is like you'll have a case where grandma might get hit with a certain type of scam, but that's never the whole picture. That's never that full view of what's really going on. Because again, you've got cases where that's one perspective and like one little lens piece that you're looking at. But you've also got the case where the attackers are hitting this industry over here or this piece over here. And it's only once you go ahead and get together in those groups that you can realize, hey, everybody is actually looking at the same problem. It's just we all have a different lens on that. So can you go into some of the overlaps with other types of crimes that you were seeing over there, that overlap with the scam ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. But let me pull a little bit first on a thread that you just rightly called out. Perspective is everything at the end of the day. So, grandma gets hit, everybody cares. Maybe people do or don't have the bandwidth to do something about it, but everybody feels bad, right? But everybody also thinks Granny was an isolated one off. That we know romance scams happen, there's the Netflix specials, you name it. But these highly coordinated attacks manifest as isolated one offs. Unless you can find ways to aggregate those one offs, you can't see that full picture. So that's part of the value of the NCFTA as one example. There was a scenario last year. Some of this campaign is still going on, and some of it's tied to phishing activity that has been very common. There's a new level of sophistication that targets individuals by impersonating banks. And there's three legs to the stool. There's a voice piece, there's an SMS piece, there's a malicious website piece. They appear differently to the target. Whether the target is truly victimized or not depends at this point in time, in large part, on their ability to trust their spidey sense. The threat actor gets the target to download a remote access software, primarily AnyDesk, which is a legitimate tool, legitimate use cases. I would call you. I would tell you that I'm from your bank's fraud department. I would tell you that I'm looking at a weird wire or ACH or something. Then I would text you a link to a website that looks like your bank's commercial online banking platform. You'd go there, and then I'd tell you, okay, I'm from the bank and I'm here to help. Click this little button, download AnyDesk. Let me jump in and we'll get your account straightened out. Then I'm going to stall you for 2 hours, showing you one thing on your screen while behind the scenes, I'm logged in as you because you put your credentials in the fake website, and I'm firing out payments left and right. And you have no clue. I've got you tied up and you're not seeing the activity in your account. It's a highly successful attack. And again, it appears as a one off, right? By the time you figure it out and you call your financial institution, like, oh, well, this is bad, but you authorized the payments. We see your login and the activity came from your known device, right? It suddenly, as a victim, you need to prove an unknown, not because the bank doesn't care, but because everything looks legitimate. So that's one piece of this whole thing. It appears as a one off to begin with. Instead, it's a global, highly orchestrated campaign, initially made possible by the Small Business Administration, posting detailed information on every company that took out a stimulus payout during COVID, right? COVID seems like a lifetime ago. Why is somebody going after PPP stuff that's available for free on SBA.gov? That allowed the threat actors to download all of that information and then do their reconnaissance and pre work using social media, LinkedIn, social engineering, you name it. By the time they called you impersonating your bank, they knew where you bank, they knew what kind of business you're in, they had a sense of your annual revenue, and they were able to target and prioritize. So again, those instances looked like a one-off, but they weren't. We touched on Unit 221B earlier. I got to give them another shout out. And full transparency, I'm not shilling for them. I don't have a contract with them today. They're just players in the game for the right reason. So I called them when I got the first report, and my client who'd been victimized had taken a screenshot of the text message they received and got it to a relationship manager who got it to my team. I gave that to Unit 221B, and they were able to backtrack and quickly understand the scope of the campaign and how many financial institutions' client bases were currently being attacked. They could map the whole thing out. With that info, you take it to the NCFTA. Most of those 30 banks happen to be members there. Next thing you know, everybody is on a call, and no, none of these are one offs. And yep, we're all seeing the same damn thing. This is how we connect the dots. And an important point, everybody hates it when Granny gets robbed, right? We take it personal. It hurts. I can't tell you how many times I can't keep food down with the stories we hear in this space. But a reality is, let's say Granny got taken for 800 grand. Her entire life savings, she's now facing some very unpalatable choices. You file the
Yeah,
police report, you take that to the FBI, and you're going to get, I am really sorry to hear that. I've only got so much headcount and capacity. That is a terrible story you just told me, Dave, but I can't put my coffee cup down for that. That's the brutal reality, right? In the general public, people think the feds are there, the cavalry is coming. They don't understand limited headcount, limited capacity, ridiculous caseloads. So, in the scenario I just described with the impersonation scams, the offensive intel that 221B was able to capture in a very small period of time, coupled with the aggregation we could do with the NCFTA, and the FBI sits on site there. They have a representative in Pittsburgh and a presence in New York as well. Through that aggregation, I didn't need to convince an agent in a field office to set the coffee cup down. The Bureau was firing up all the coffee makers everywhere and assigning somebody to play point guard to connect the dots with the reports into the field offices. It's a very decentralized agency. Being able to create that centralization through the NCFTA gave the industry a chance to understand what was happening, gave law enforcement threads that they needed to go try to disrupt, and gave us information to take to carriers, for example. Because again, there's that voice piece, SMS piece. The websites have to be handled differently. The law enforcement piece, it is so complicated. And having that capability to take the isolated one off and turn it into this is a big steaming pile of problem, everybody get in the ring, is how you get to the dot connecting between this was a scam that went after grandma, but that was an assassination, or that is violence as a service, or cyber enabled human harm, et cetera, et cetera. It's that aggregation that begins to tell that story. And that's where you have to have the banks, but also plenty of other partners. And depending on the scam, maybe the funds are going out through prepaid gift cards purchased at a big box retailer, right? You got to have all those players at the table speaking a common language.
and a lot of people don't realize we are now that cavalry. We're now those folks who are coming to do what we can to try and help. So how can we work together in order to kind of stop this? So like with that one-off case where it was a single phone call or it was a single case where they're like, hey, go install AnyDesk. It's not just that one person who's seeing that. And when you start tracking that up the chain, it's like, okay, so this is not just this one group who's doing this, or it's not just this one bank that's targeted. It's now 15 banks. And when you have that conversation with those 15 banks as a whole, you can think very much in that three-dimensional space, if you will, or kind of think laterally across that, where you're not in your own echo chamber, but you're able to kind of throw that idea out into the ether and be like, okay, based on all of these things, how can we address this as a whole? And that type of thinking, that type of thought process, that's something that a lot of people aren't really in the process of doing, if you will. And like we do it on a small level. Don't get me wrong, because like if I'm like, okay, I need to bring my car to a mechanic, how can I do that? I'm like, I don't know how to mechanic, so I'm gonna go and bring it to somebody who knows that. Likewise, when you have these different trust groups that are put together, you're able to start bouncing ideas off of everybody. And when you're at a place like Disruption, when you're at like these closed conferences, there's a level of implicit trust that goes along with that. So you're able to have more open conversations. And like I know I had one case where I was at a conference, someone pulled me aside and they were like, "Hey, that Black Act stuff that you're looking over here, when it comes to them doing COVID relief funds, when it comes to them targeting these grandparents and doing this running these prostitution rings in Italy, we also have cases of them doing car theft and buying and shipping cars outside the United States and outside the United States. So now with that alone, it's something where, okay, now I can operate from that perspective where I know, okay, all of these pieces are in somehow related. So that again, they tie back to that group. And it's
Right.
only once you start working with those larger groups, the disruptions, the NCFTAs, and just those larger think tank, or those larger think group organizations, if you will, it's only then you're able to kind of start piecing that together and kind of making that bigger impact. And it's like what, and when you start putting like a lot of the FIs together on that same phone call, it's moving away from, okay, let's push blame back to the victim, but actually think in a way of, okay, we don't have to do it this way. How can we actually stop the money and help grandmom at the same time? And it's only once you start thinking in that regard and kind of thinking in that three-dimensional chess, if you will, it's like that's when you can really start making those impacts as a whole.
Right. I should also do a hat tip to the FS-ISAC in this conversation as well.
Very much so. Very much so.
Some commonalities in approach between the NCFTA and the ISAC. The big difference is the NCFTA, and you called it out, it's a smaller, closed community. It tends to be the larger and better resourced banks. There's some credit unions as well, but again, they're the big players, right? So it tends to be the organizations that have teams thinking and operating the way that we're talking about, who have the capabilities to root out the, whether it's technical, operational, whatever complexities that are involved. On the ISAC side, much, much bigger membership, north of 5,000 banks in 75 countries. And the same membership that's in CFTA is at the ISAC, but then you've got all the smaller, less resourced banks who can't do what the bigger banks can do. Those two organizations working in partnership has created situations where we can solve something at the NCFTA, punch it through the ISAC. So, from a global perspective, people understand this is what's happening. Here's some options in your toolkit today. Do what you can. The flip side of that, we've seen sort of the canary in the coal mine attacks hitting very small banks, including internationally, that will get shared through the ISAC. That makes it to those of us that are in CFTA members. So it's a very effective bi-directional partnership that paint the holistic picture.
Yeah, and to do a quick definition of terms here, because I know you're referencing Isaac and everything. So that is an information sharing and analysis center. So for example, with the FS, that's the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center. That's essentially a group in an organization that consists of many of your financial institutions. So, like Dave, what you were mentioning was that, again, having worked with them, I love them too. They're working with banks, they're working with credit unions, and they're also working with smaller branches and organizations as well as working internationally. So now you essentially have an analysis center that caters to information and insights that your financial sector is seeing. Well, I was working with a defense contractor we had a similar model where we called it the defense industrial base. Essentially, it was a group of the defense contractors who were seeing different types of cyber attacks that were targeting us. So we could very easily go and share information and say, hey, we saw this APT attack hitting us. We were able to track this and see what they were phishing us with. And then you might have another contractor come on and say, hey, here's what we saw as well. There's also other ISACs out there too. I know there's a real estate ISAC, there's a religious organization ISAC. So with each of these clusters, you've got different groups that are targeted specifically to your sector. So if you're in a specific sector, you can actually work on trying to identify the other organization and trying to find those like-minded people. Like, hey, we want to see who's targeting the oil sector, who's targeting the technology sector, and there are those groups out there that you can become a part of. The other good thing too is many are considered nonprofits, or they're essentially groups that have very low operating costs. So it's not necessarily a bar to enter. Many of them, like when you are a member, some of them do charge a membership fee. But if you're a smaller organization or a smaller institution, you can become a member of those. And like I know FS-ISAC is one of those where your larger organization's obviously going to have a bigger foothold and they're going to pay more and stuff to be part of that. But that also helps offset the cost for those smaller groups to kind of be able to try and make that difference. Because again, everybody's being targeted, everybody's seeing a part of the scam, and everyone's seeing a different piece of it. So it's only once you kind of start taking that step back, then you realize that somebody might see the roof, someone might see the internal joist, somebody might see the third floorboard on the side from the house. But if there's mold at that spot, maybe that's the one that's going to have the whole thing collapse. So when you're looking for that moldy board, you could then do that to kind of take the entire attacker infrastructure out.
I love that analogy. Very, very well put.
Thank you. Literally came up with it on the spot. So
those are the best ones usually.
Yep.
It's just such a crazy world, and I'm glad you called out the other ISACs. I would like to see a world where those all start sharing information a little bit more than they do today as well. Because again, just the interconnectedness of it all. But it's fantastic that they exist and the conversations do occur. There's just opportunities for them to occur more fully, more effectively, more holistically, but at the end of the day, effectively. It almost doesn't matter how much we know in this world. It matters what we can or cannot do. And you got to know in order to do, but the doing is the hard part. There's laws and regulations that get in the way of sharing the information to do what we need to do.
And everybody in every bank interprets 314B differently.
100%.
So on that topic, do you want to go ahead and walk in through like just quickly what 314B is and like how some banks will interpret that differently as opposed to other banks?
Yeah, sure. So super high level, 314B is just a section of the Patriot Act that came out post 9/11. And as there was a dawning recognition that a bunch of money laundering had funded the terrorist organizations behind that attack, light bulbs started to go off. Federal agencies realized they all needed to start sharing information better. And the intent of 314B as part of the Patriot Act was to create a process for banks to begin doing exactly what law enforcement was beginning to do, share information amongst ourselves and with law enforcement. It focused on the law enforcement piece, and the idea was to get your anti-money laundering shop a way to get qualified, detailed investigative analysis on the financial side into the hands of law enforcement for prosecution, indictment. Great idea. It's a great step forward. It's still effective today for money laundering investigations, which might take 6, 12, 18 months as a norm. Money laundering is a complex world that tends to be after the fact, which allows lead time to fully develop a story in order for arrests and meaningful verdicts. Under 314B, there's a clause that provides safe harbor for banks that are going to share information. And safe harbor just means, if you got a piece wrong or you were disclosing a customer relationship or whatever, you can't be sued for it because you're doing the right thing. Attorneys across the industry, and I have great legal partners where I work. So I'm not bagging on attorneys here. I'm talking just kind of generically how things kind of flowed. You get that ruling, it comes out, attorneys look at that and go, okay, well, we see some similar stuff with fraud. So if we want to share that, we'll just piggyback on 314B because we have the safe harbor. Logical conclusion for an attorney to reach, right? I can't fault the logic as far as it goes, but fraud and increasingly the scams landscape, they're moving at the speed of malicious AI driven thought. You don't have 6 or 12 or 18 months to mop up after the fact.
You don't even
That
have 2 months.
no, no. Sometimes you don't have 2 days. An explicit example of that ties back to that bank impersonation scam. I mean, you and I both know we used to live in a world where there were industry standard ways to scan the internet for brand impersonation and malicious websites. And then you'd send to registrars for takedown. And those websites would just be up until somebody found them and took them down. Right. Now, today, if I call you to run that impersonation scam on you, I have thousands of websites already parked, but not up and visible. And I'm not kicking yours live until I send you the text message with the link. It's going to be up for 2, 3, 4 minutes, long enough for you to pop your credentials in, and it's gone. Like, we don't have 2 minutes sometimes. So 314B was effective as designed. Graham Leach Biley, GLBA for short, was kind of intended to bridge the gap, but it didn't come with the safe harbor. So attorneys said, well, we're not pushing that lever, right? We're going to stick with 314B. We're in a world now where those conflicting things, coupled with the evolution of the threat landscape, make it very, very difficult to share the data effectively. And to your point, every bank, every chief counsel and their organizations have interpreted pieces of that differently. The interesting thing to me is that on the cybersecurity and technology side, this industry has been sharing threat actor information for a quarter of a century, doing it very effectively. And you were calling it out earlier with some of the works that you did, right? We saw this APT doing these things and we're passing that information around. Nobody had any issue with that. Well, in a world where I'm using multiple technology channels to subvert or not to subvert, but to acquire your credentials in order to subvert the bank's authentication process, why on earth could that not be shared? It's still a technology
Exactly.
attack, right?
Exactly. And like with that, it's a lot of the cases where when we went into doing this, like again, early days of the defense industrial base, we were sharing the attacks with each other because we understood that with this organization, we can help that organization.
Mhm.
Likewise, they were like, hey, if we share this, we can help that organization. So like we might have had a Barracuda, they might have had a Blue Coat signatures may have captured something where our Barracudas may not have. And again, by being able to have that tip off, we're able to kind of stop that. And
Exactly.
you're kind of using that collective networking stack, if you will, to where you're able to start adapting and changing to that. And and the one case that you gave with the example where the attackers had you on the phone for 2 hours and were doing it behind the scenes, the honest reality of that from a technical perspective is that attackers are now finding a way to bypass the protections that are baked into banking applications. They're finding ways to bypass the login information and they're trying to intentionally fool the technology stack that's in there. And with that, like, I'm not trying to be an alarmist here, but those are big steps. Those are big things. That's moved from your traditional model where an attacker could compromise an account, log in from their computer, and use that in order to get into the bank account. They're now using your own computer to log into that. So now banks and financial institutions are straight up blind, like they don't see any of those things happening. And again, it looks like authentic traffic. It looks like it's something that's actually going on. And when those users are now tricked into giving over that information, the wrong answer is to try and push that back to the victim. That's what a lot of the banks and financial institutions do. And it's like, it's not a case where like, okay, they received a phone call, but how would I go and explain to my grandparents, hey, there's this really advanced attack out there where someone's going to call you pretending to be the bank, but they're not going to be the bank. They're going to send you to a website that looks like the bank website, but it's not really the bank website. They're going to talk to you like they're from the bank and say that they're from the bank, and it's going to seem absolutely logical and in line to what you're seeing. But you have to have a level of skepticism to where it's like, okay, are you really the bank or are you not the bank? I mean, I'm a little paranoid as it is, but it's like I'm not going to go and tell my grandparents to be paranoid of every little thing because that's not healthy to spot. And it's like for many of us in the field, like we're wired for that natural skepticism, but you can only train that level of paranoia so far before you're like, hey, maybe the onus is on us. Maybe there's something that we can provide back. Maybe there's other things that we can look at too. And maybe we can realize these things are a whole heck of a lot more complex than, oh,
Right.
skip per victim push link get compromised. Like that ain't how it works anymore. Like
Right.
that was great. That was great 10 years ago. But when you're seeing synthetic IDs mixed with using your local hardware device from your computer and now using AI voices to pretend to be the bank and then having like three-way calls with the bank and now your bank people are getting called in on it and everything. Like I said, it's way more complex than it ever used to be.
Yes. It's insane. And you hit on a great point. There's a needle to thread on the education side because not everybody needs to run around with a tinfoil Stetson like the one that I have. Right?
I like my tinfoil hats. I like my
Uh,
UFO stories.
yes. Yes. But not everybody does. And so on the one hand, I think you're rightly calling out. You don't want to just scare everybody because we don't need paralysis. We need proactive thinking. We need a population that A, knows where its spidey sense is, and B, knows how to trust it. It's also true that the best way to not be paralyzed with fear about something is to understand it, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I used to be terrified of spiders, but it's like once I started researching them and realizing that most of the spiders that you have are like very docile and everything, I'm like, ooh, daddy long legs. I'll pick that up and kind of look
right,
at it and stuff. Or like I was doing some research on jumping spiders because I had a really big one, like a little bugger was like that big and everything, like randomly came down here in my basement and stuff. And like it was and like as I was going and like walking around, it was like turning and looking at me and stuff. Like I thought I was losing my mind, but like I looked it up and everything, and they're like, no, with jumping spiders, they are a very curious spider. So like they will actually look at you and like acknowledge your presence of like, what's this big fleshy blob? So it was something where like I used to be terrified of spiders and everything, and then got to a point where I'm like, okay, once I started understanding that and being more comfortable with that and kind of having that awareness to kind of say, hey, this isn't that terrifying thing, it actually
right.
made it feel okay. And likewise, going online and going to your bank, and like, again, I have this conversation a lot with folks, is that doing online banking is not a bad thing. Doing something like that is not scary. Like, I do all my online banking with my bank and stuff and everything, and it's great. It makes my life a whole lot easier. But if somebody calls me and says, hey, I'm your bank, that's when my spider senses go up and everything,
Yes,
because again, that breaks process. And I don't necessarily need someone to call me to say, hey, I'm this person.
right.
Because if I go to I'm like, cool, I'll go. If there's a fraud thing, cool, I will call the number on the back of my card, call it a day. And it's that simple.
By crazy Uncle Larry on the patio at the Mexican restaurant drinking margaritas on Saturdays, responding back to every text message that he gets because it's fun to jack with the scammers, has no concept of what
Yep.
you just said. And
Absolutely.
that's
Absolutely.
where the opportunity
One,
is.
I'll say one, because he had several margaritas and stuff, but two, how do you train Uncle Larry?
That's a piece we put a lot of thought into. That happens across the industry, certainly not limited to the institution that pays my mortgage. But how do we extend and expand that? And I'll riff and pull on that thread for a second. There are organizations out there trying to do education, and sometimes it's after the fact. Other organizations are trying to get out ahead of things. I mean, the banks never asked that website exists for a reason, right? I'm thinking about use cases where people would be vulnerable without knowing that they are. So, as an example, where I live, there are several, but there's one really good, respectable, well run food bank. And the leadership there has a lot more understanding about the criminal side of the world than you would expect in that kind of organization. So I've been talking to them about who comes in, what are their circumstances, and if you're having to hit a food bank, there's no shame in that. I want to be 100% clear there, but there that does mean there is some flavor of desperation in your life, right? Which automatically makes you more susceptible and vulnerable because you are now laser focused on the scariest thing. And if it's making sure your kids have dinner, there's not much left to focus on, right? The person in that situation is also, if they're thinking about scams at all, they're naturally thinking, I'm the wrong target. I don't have money. I got to go to the food bank. There's nothing here, right? So they think they're getting a pass. What they're not thinking about is the onslaught of fake and malicious remote work jobs. And they need a side hustle. It's easy for those people to apply for the wrong job and get hired, W 2 and everything, looks legit, only to find out 6 months later that they're a money mule or involved in moving illicit stolen goods. If it's not money directly, they're now a criminal. And when the actor decides to put the hammer down and explain to them how much their life has changed, now you got a whole different level of desperation because you're a crook and the receipts are there. How are you going to tell your local PD about that?
Yep,
Right.
and it's and on that topic, when you're having that discussion, it's a lot of people are in this mindset where it's very simple. You now have to go and be like, okay, that person's a crook. You can't trust them. The reality is their perception, their reality has been modified and manipulated for 6 months. So you now have to work with that person to unpack they were tricked and the money that they were getting or like what they were facilitating was something where like they truly did not realize what they were doing was wrong because they may have gotten that text message from Monster Organization, which we've seen Monster impersonated, where it's like go cash and go send these checks to these people as part of your job and everything. And when you go and send them the check, it's for payments that are going to be sent out to these vendors and everything. So, like from that perspective, everything looks on the up and up and everything, but they don't realize that they're now money mule. And law enforcement's approach is like, okay, I'm going to go give you this single notification and say that what you're doing is bad and it's wrong that you need to get out of it. But the reality is not that simple as you have this small interaction versus this much experience and our body is not going to accept this small perspective when you see this thing here, and that's why it's so hard to actually get people out of it to try and pull them out of those scams or out of that romantic relationship, if you will, because again, they're seeing this here, but our experience with them is only ever that much. So it's like really hard to do that. So, and again for those who were listening, I was having my hands really really small together versus really wide together because again, I'm sitting here doing that. I'm like, oh yeah, part of this is on video, but part of this is not. So
Good catch. Good catch. Um, so as I'm thinking through, like, what could I put together that just local food banks could use? And whether that's me going and doing presentations or can I put content together for them to distribute? Maybe it'll help, right? So I'm in Texas. There's a lot of counties in Texas. I don't know how many off the top of my head, but it's a hell of a lot. Every county's got a sheriff. That sheriff needs to know that residents in his county are being targeted in the way we just described. Because at some point, his office is going to get a phone call and they need to know you might have a criminal self reporting, but that is not your target. That is not the case you need to build. You need to protect that person. collect all their information, talk to your counterparts across Texas and across the country, and start engaging with state, federal, international law enforcement. But how many county sheriffs know that? I
Very few, very
some,
few.
right. It's not the norm. So as I'm thinking through what kind of targeted education and awareness sounds so stupid. It's overused and overdone, but I don't know what other words apply. But as I
Mhm.
try to think about how do I just get the word out and tell a story in a way that people can consume and understand, and take them from a world where they have no idea what's targeting them or their kids to, well, now you know, and here's some tools. Oh, and by the way, law enforcement isn't looking to jack up your life if you get caught, right? They need your information to help teams like mine and shops like yours, Ronnie, to go jack up the bad guys' lives. Because at the end of the day, bad people should have bad days. And that should be
Yep.
the entire focus here. We should
Yep,
be playing offense.
that's what we say here with Rexxfield. We make bad people sad. So,
There you go. There you go.
yep.
That same kind of tailored content for like, you know, assisted living scenarios, nursing homes. Um, and for the families, because they don't necessarily know how grandma and grandpa are getting targeted while they're in those facilities. But something also needs to be put together to take to church youth groups and kids groups, because most people that are in church 3 times a week or every time the doors are open have no idea who's going after their kids on Roblox. They don't know just how far the little supercomputer that they've put in their kids' hands makes their kid visible to truly evil people. We know this stuff. We've dealt with families of sextortion victims. We've worked with people like Paul Raphael, who is advancing that ball on the global stage. But again, the church mom, she doesn't know. She doesn't know this world exists. I'm trying to figure out, with the limitations that I have working within a bank, right? My leadership appropriately is going to protect the institution. The attackers are targeting the industry, or industries plural. So there's two very competing difficult goalposts there, and I'm trying to figure out where is that sweet spot in the middle. Where's the 50-yard line where I can take everything that I know and go arm people who have no clue how they're being targeted with at least mechanisms to shift their thinking and protect themselves a little bit. They'll never know everything I know. They don't need to. And I don't want them staying up at night crying the way that I and my people do sometimes. I don't want that for the people who don't have to see the ugly. I just want them to not get blindsided and snapped up by the ugly. And there's got to be a way to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think with that, I think that's a good, open-ended question to leave the episode on, because I know that that's something where a lot of us are really thinking about. We're trying to figure what's that next step and how do we try and make it to where we can kind of move forward from there. So like I said, I actually think that's a good spot to leave the listeners on and everything. So,
Well, hopefully they'll chime in with feedback and ideas and reach out to you, reach out to me. Let's have conversation. It's not about our institutions. It's not about our roles. It's not about our lanes. I would love for people who consume this episode to come back and start conversations. Let's just get a bunch of smart people with bad attitudes thinking the same way and going after the bad people. We're already on
absolutely.
their hit list. Let's figure out how to put them on our hit list.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with that, is there any last things you wanna go ahead and lead with? Any
I
last notes?
just as always, appreciate you, the role that you've played in the space. I have definitely appreciated the opportunity to work more closely with you over these last several years.
It's been fun. It's been fun.
Yeah, well, that is a word, but
Mhm.
I enjoy your passion, your intelligence, and just thank you very, very much for giving me the opportunity to come in and run my mouth for a little bit today.
Absolutely,
So
man. Absolutely. Great having you. We'll have to have you on again.
I'm
So,
all for it.
Yeah, so with that, that is the end of the Rexxfield Investigates podcast. Make sure you smash that like button, do whatever the whoosy what's it is, that other podcast episode, streamers, content creators, wherever the hell it tells you to do. And with that, we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye for now.